big effort that took place over the course of 2019. And it was a serious pleasure to be part of, because I got to meet and to engage with people like Mesa, for example, who are very passionate about astronomy. And something that I learned is that there is an inherent want to use astronomy to give back and to educate and to inspire local communities. So IAU 100 really sought to facilitate that enthusiasm and to support it, and to allow the event organizers around the world an extra means and extra support to conduct their activities. So I had the pleasure of coordinating 4 of the global projects for IAU 100. And the first of these global projects was the 100 Hours of Astronomy. So this took place over a year ago now, in January of 2019. And because this was the kickoff event, it was a bit broader in nature. You'll see that as the global projects went on, they became more specific in terms of what we sought to do. But we essentially welcomed registrations of all kinds to take place in this 100-hour period for any duration, any country, anything that involved astronomy outreach. And this was quite special in that we really got the community engaged and excited for the year of IAU 100 to take place throughout 2019. And it was also facilitated by a variety of important partners. If Jean-Pierre is here, he is one that we really owe thanks to, as he and SVI provided the telescopes through which we conducted a competition for several of our global projects to be able to give various outreach projects a telescope that was signed by astronauts that they could use for their efforts. And this was just a great way to get the community involved right at the start. And I think that's one of the key elements of having a successful global outreach project on this scale, when one like this is being coordinated, is to have a framework that's established. So having key contact points in each of the countries in which the IAU national outreach coordinators were imperative. Without them, none of this would have been possible, because they are the ones that know what the needs are for their respective regions. So as a coordinator, I had the sincere gift of really engaged and really skilled NOCs that were able to help facilitate this project. This was again exemplified when we pursued the Moon Landing 50 project. This is one that I coordinated in July of 2019 to coordinate with the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. But of course, activities took place all around the weeks and months around that date of the 20th and 21st of July. And we knew there was a lot of projects taking place around the world. And one thing in outreach, because there are so many people that are engaged and excited, we tried to find something that could make ours different, or to identify a way that made our project engaging. And there was 2 ways we sought to do that. The first one was to develop the first, and it turns out the only, global event list for all Moon Landing 50 activities. Evidently, the milestone we were celebrating was one that was accomplished by NASA back 50 years ago, but this was celebrated in 128 countries. So I think that reflects the fact that this was celebrated all around the world, and it wasn't just the United States that wanted to celebrate this key milestone in space exploration. And so I think it was really motivating to see just how many people got involved. So this global events list for all places, we found there was a lot of country lists that were available, but there was not a single global events list until we created this one for Moon Landing 50. We also really wanted to engage amateur astronomers to encourage observations of the moon around this time, because while we look back on milestones, I think it's a great opportunity to get us excited for what's coming up next. And I'll talk about some exciting milestones that we've celebrated this year, but that was a big one. And I like to also consider various aspects of being inclusive and diverse when coordinating outreach projects on a global scale. And something that I always keep in mind is different impairments and collection of resources in different languages, so that as many people can become involved as possible. So as a coordinator, I really tried hard to get as many resources as we could, different languages, for different learning needs, for different impairments, so that everyone could become involved. And I also sought for this particular project to also consider diversity in age. The International Astronomical Union in and of itself sits to represent professional astronomers as well as amateur astronomers, but I was thinking about how we could inspire the next generation of astronomers. And with that being said, I decided to organize a global art competition that celebrated the moon and the milestone under the theme of IAU 100, which is under one sky. So it was adapted to under one moon. Um, so I think this was a great way of engaging a younger audience, and it was a very big success. We had hundreds of entries from over 50 countries around the world, and it was sincerely inspiring to see the creativity. They put my creativity and art to shame. They amazing job. And I think this was a unique way of stimulating some younger interest. Because it's something we also want to keep in mind. There are many different ways that we have to consider diversity and being inclusive in the activities that we organize. So this is one that I was quite excited about to see the interest that we had. The next one took place in November of 2019. This one was different in that we wanted to harness those that are communicators. I think astronomy and space communicators is very broad, and that's what makes it great. Astronomy Day in schools look to harness that by inviting communicators, including teachers, scientists, professional science communicators, to go to schools in their community to conduct outreach for astronomy. And in this way, we were engaging them to develop a relationship with their local community. We hoped that this would not be a one-off event, but then they could build a relationship with these schools so that they could continue to come back to support activities from their respective curriculums, to come back for specific events. So we really wanted to lay the groundwork for continuing these outreach projects in the school setting. Because students can always find different ways of learning. And I think something that can always pique some extra engagement is when we have a special guest that comes in to talk about what it is they do or an exciting topic, and space and astronomy is always an exciting topic. So to have someone coming into their schools to speak to them about it was effective in that regard. So we were excited to have, we should correct the slide here, it's not 110 students, it was 110,000 students that we engaged in this project. So it was one that we hope will instill the next generation of astronomers and space scientists and communicators of themselves. And like I said, that's something that astronomy can do, unlike most other fields, is really inspire adults as well as children alike. And the last project, here are a couple pictures actually from the Astronomy Day in schools. I think we can agree that it was something that was quite exciting. And I'll add here that something that can make an outreach project in astronomy very effective is to establish a brand or a key visual that will be used throughout all outreach efforts. So all of these visuals that you're seeing, these logos for each of these projects, these were used by all of the respective event organizers. We helped translate them, both the posters and the visuals, in order to effectively provide them with extra resources and to localize them for their own events. And that's something really important that we tried to get right here in these efforts. Finally, we had an 11th and last outreach project that was conducted just a couple months ago as the final IAU 100 project. With that being said, we wanted it to hone down on a message and a sentiment of being inclusive, feeling together, which astronomy does. So with that being said, the Pale Blue Dot Project looked to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the pale blue dot image. So this little bright dot that you can see in the image here was taken by Voyager 1 30 years ago in February. And we wanted to reflect that image because this is a picture of Earth taken from very, very, very far away. So this can not only make us feel small, but can maybe remind us of how important it is, the planet that we're on. So these were the type of themes that we wanted to be celebrated as the final IAU 100 Global Project. The community had worked so hard throughout 2019, and we thought this was a great sentiment to end on. So we thought the themes of global citizenship and environmental stewardship were effective means of closing that out. So having important themes as well as milestones to connect together, I think was an effective tool to engage our community one last time, specifically for IAU 100. And we know that some of these projects will continue through the IAU, through the Office of Astronomy Outreach over the coming years. But without the help of all the many people that brought this project together, I think it would not have been possible. So this was a great project that ended the busy year on. I think it was quite special in that regard. And it was one that we can look back on with really positive feelings in terms of the impact that IU 100 had, and for everyone to consider just the amount of applications and effects that astronomy has for us here on Earth as well. Next, I want to talk about some of the different projects beyond IU 100 that I've worked on, because there are many different strategies that we'll implement for outreach for astronomy depending on the project or the intended audience. And for this project called Space Scoop, which you can take a look at spacescoop.org, this is implemented through a Horizon 2020 European project called Space EU. It was previously part of Universe Awareness, and this initiative has partnered with various organizations, astronomy organizations around the world, so that when a new press release in the field of astronomy is published for these organizations, there will also be a Space Scoop article that's published as well. And the Space Scoop article is intended to be for younger readers. So each of these articles that we put out is in simpler language, shorter sentences. We have word banks. We have various translations in many different languages. And if you'd like to be a volunteer translator, I encourage you to get in touch. And this is one of the ways that we try to instill inspiration as well as understanding for the next generation. One of the problems that we battle with in the space sector in general, more broadly, is the joke that space is a bit too hard to work with. It's like rocket science. And I want to change that from a young age by finding means like this to engage younger audiences so that they have tools to understand these concepts from a younger age. And that's something that Space Scoop has been great for. And this is a project that had been running for a few years before I came on as coordinator about a year ago. So this is a project that we keep working with. There's a few press releases and articles that come out each month. And I encourage you to take a look. It's just one of the examples of means that we can engage with a different audience. Here's an example of a front page on the Space Scoop, so you can see it's a bit more friendly in tone. We really want it to be engaging and inviting. And we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the audience that we're trying to reach or to engage with. So in this case, it being a younger audience. Next, I want to talk about something that's even more broad, a topic in which we're trying to communicate science to a very global audience. So this telescope we're looking at is the Hubble Space Telescope. It is a joint mission between NASA in the United States and the European Space Agency for Europe. So it is a joint cooperative mission. And for just over a year now, I've had the sincere pleasure of being the public information officer for the Hubble telescope for the European Space Agency. So this means I'm responsible for managing the spacetoLescope.org website, through which we have our press releases, announcements, Hubblecast, which are short documentaries, public outreach projects, and of course, Hubble celebrated its biggest 30th anniversary just a couple weeks ago. So Hubble's a bit different in terms of outreach because there's a sense of awareness that's already instilled in much of the audience. Just about anywhere on Earth, odds are that you've heard the word Hubble. How many details you know about the mission can vary, but at least the word Hubble is familiar, and some of these images are the ones that people recognize. So when I came on board to this project, I wanted to really reflect not only the beauty of this imagery, but it's important to find ways to communicate what it is we're looking at in these images, because they are beautiful, and it is because of Hubble that we're able to see what the universe really looks like. At the end of the day, you and I are all just made of stardust, but Hubble was the reason that we're able to visualize it for the first time. And I like to remind people of just how the state of science and astronomy was when Hubble launched. On April 24th, 1990, the telescope was put into orbit. We did not know of any other exoplanets or other planets other than those in our own solar system. We also had no idea as to what the age of the universe was. It ranged from 10 to 20 billion years. Today, it's now been defined down to 13.8 billion. So Hubble has not only contributed to those facts, but that just gives you an idea of where we stood. Now we know of over 4,000 exoplanets, of which Hubble has found many. And it's now been operating for 30 years. And this was the anniversary picture that we put out a couple weeks ago. And if you're taking a look at this, it almost looks like it's not real. And in fact, it is. And this is something we want to emphasize, is how Hubble takes its observations of the light that it sees and interprets the data for science as well as imagery. So what we're looking at here is two galaxies, NGC 2014, which is the big one that's in red, which was formed by a cluster of stars that we see here in the middle. Most of these are at least 10 times bigger than our sun. And to the left, we have a big blue blob. This one is called NGC 2020, which is fitting for the year. And although these objects look separate, they are actually part of the same star forming region. So this is where stars are born. And when I mentioned that we want to communicate the science behind these images, because of course we can all appreciate how beautiful they are, it's important that we're emphasizing why we're seeing what it is that we are. So for example, the red that we see, we can deduce that this was caused by the star cluster here in the middle that has shot away its cocoon of hydrogen gas, whereas the galaxy on the bottom left was caused by a single star, which has therefore this big region of superheated oxygen around it, which is the reason that we're seeing this blue region here. So these are the things that we want to communicate, and why some of the stars are different colors, why we're looking at things the way they are, and what that tells us about astronomy in general. What can it tell us about stars that are forming, the patterns in the gas that we are seeing. This is the type of things that we want to dive deeper in, instead of just looking at the pictures. Although they're beautiful, we want to dive in a bit deeper. So with this being said, we also want to engage the public in a greater way. So just as an example of an initiative that we launched, two around the anniversary included baking birthday cakes for Hubble. And we now also have an open call if you're interested to submit artwork or artistic creations of all kinds that say thank you to Hubble for its 30 years. So we've received sculptures, graphic designs, poetry from all around the world that just say thank you and reflect the human impact and cultural impact that its imagery and its science have had, because it's important to hone in on the human impact of these missions sometimes that can get lost behind all the science and technology. So it's nice on a milestone like the 30th birthday to bring in activities like this. So next I want to take a little bit of a step back for the rest of the presentation to talk how I got into this work of outreach and communications, and to talk a little bit about some exciting things that I've been working on in terms of actually going to space. So this is a picture of me a year ago, just yesterday, believe it or not. I realized when I was putting this together. This is me in front of Meteor Crater in Arizona in the United States. And it was definitely a moment of pause for me to reflect on the things that I find important, which is communicating astronomy and space science and space technology to the greater public, so that everyone can respect and value what these impacts are at a greater scale. So to speak to that and how I got involved with that, I like to show this image, which may seem very irrelevant, but the reason I show it is because most people can relate to what it's like to walk a dog. It likely looks something like this. You're going left, you're going right, turning circles. It's very inconsistent. And in terms of someone like me who's still a young professional and making their way through their career, this is a lot what the experience has been like. It's been had its ups, it's had its downs, it's had unexpected turns. Which I'll speak a little bit to, but this is a great example of walking a dog. It's not going to go in a straight direction that you think it will. There will be a lot of turns, even if the end goal is the same. How you get there may not always be. So in terms of a little bit of context, I come from the island of Newfoundland, of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. I've been working in the domain of space and outreach, primarily for the European space sector for the past few years. But this is where I came from, and here there are not particularly direct access to studying or working in space. So unfortunately for me, I had to leave my home province in order to get this experience. But it's something now that I'm working on and bringing it back home so that there are means of opportunities for those who want to get engaged. And I'll touch on how I've been doing that a little bit. To give you an idea, the love for space has been strong for many years now. My passions have been music and space for as long as I can remember. Um, and this was me now in high school, not having a clue what I'd be working in, but I knew it would involve space to some extent. And it's when I met a Canadian astronaut, Chris Hadfield, back in the year 2010, that I recognized that he would have an integral impact on my life, because I communicated to him that there had never been someone who had gone to space from Atlantic, Canada, which is the region of Canada that I come from. So these 4 provinces have not had anyone go to space yet. Most of those who have been to space for Canada are from the western or central region, where it's more populous, because we are more rural. And I told him I want to improve that. And he told me to do good work for my community and to get my name out there. And at the time, at that age, I had no idea how I was going to do so. But I decided to start a nonprofit organization that had nothing to do with shoes whatsoever. Sorry, it had nothing to do with space, and instead had everything to do with shoes. I decided to found an organization that would be collecting unwanted shoes from those who didn't need them to redistribute around my community. The original goal was about 100 shoes, but within a couple weeks we had about 1,000. So this grew quite quickly, and I wanted to find a way to make it bigger, so we expanded across Canada and eventually around the world. The distribution spanned quite far, and it's because of many people who volunteered their time, their resources, that made this possible, that we were able to provide shoes, many of whom received their first pair of footwear. And this is an initiative that still goes on today in its own capacity. Unfortunately, I had to move away to pursue my master's degree in space studies, so I could not remain as president for this project, but it operated for 2.5 years officially, and now it continues in an unofficial format, so that people are still getting shoes to those who need them, from those who no longer want them or need their extra shoes. So this was the way that I sought to give back to my community and to maybe get my name out there throughout my province, as Commander Hadfield had suggested. And it's because of this that I sought to get more engaged with school. So in my undergraduate degree, I wasn't studying space at all. I was actually studying animals and how they interact with humans. So I spent time in Alaska working with these big furry bison. I was studying animals and how their engagement with humans has changed over time, and how we can better prepare ourselves so that animals' lives and livelihoods are not impacted by humans. But I always had this inkling of wanting to work with space. So it took some time for me to have the courage to say, I really want to try this out. So that's through my master's that I did pursue space. And from my master's degree, I succeeded in having an internship at the European Space Agency, through which I worked closely with the British astronaut Tim Peake. He was nothing short of amazing. Patience is something I will always remember from him. No matter how many people he met or spoke to, he provided them with the same patience and understanding and kindness. And I think that's something I will take with me for a long time. And it's ever since then I've been involved with the European Space Agency in various capacities, and now through the Hubble Space Telescope. But it's because of all these projects and personal initiatives that I found my true passion for communicating space to the general public and my community. And it's through this that I succeeded in becoming a scientist astronaut candidate as of October 2018. And it's the groundworks are now being laid so that I'll be able to take a commercial space flight within the next decade. And on that space flight to conduct meaningful science experiments. So this began in October of 2018, training with people from all around the world, different backgrounds. Those 12 of us that were training in this first group together, 2 of us were specifically communicators. We wanted to be communicators for space, to communicate what this whole training experience has been like, and eventually, hopefully, the experience of spaceflight as well. And it's been quite special. It's through this program that I got to wear a spacesuit for the first time. I tell Canadians or anyone who's lived up north or in a lot of snow that they know exactly what it feels like because they put on a snowsuit, which is very similar. it was something that was quite special to put on for the first time. So every time I've put it on ever since, I still get that really special and grateful feeling. Um, I've also been doing aerobatic and parabolic training. This plane here is a plane in which I conducted aerobatic flights. So this is where we will do flips and turns and drops, in which we are able to achieve both high gravity and low gravity, high and low G's. So this means that we're able to experience brief moments of weightlessness as well as really high forces of gravity. And as you can see in this next picture here from the gauge, I was able to withstand up to 4 times the average rate of gravity, which is 4 Gs, and as low as -2. So although it's hard on the body, it's definitely fun. It's something that I've really enjoyed throughout this whole process so far. And all of this training has been taking place around work. This time last year, I was in Arizona, as I mentioned, which is where we did a geology field course to learn a lot about how we can infer the geology of other planetary bodies, including the moon and Mars. We also got to replicate some of the scientific experiments that were done by the Apollo astronauts. And this is where the NASA astronauts who are going through the government astronaut route also conduct their training. And we were also had the pleasure of being trained and briefed by those instructors. It was quite special. It was a great experience that was very enjoyed. And the people I've gotten to meet through this program have been nothing short of amazing. In October of past year, I got to go on what is called a parabolic flight, which is one in which you are simply creating a wave with the plane, but this means that at the top of each parabola, you will experience weightlessness for about 20 to 25 seconds. But on each of the slopes, both going up and down as you're experiencing these different moments of the parabolas, you will have high and low G's as well. So you'll be experiencing high forces of gravity against your body, which will be pushing you back into the seat, and then all of a sudden you're weightless. So the experiment that I was practicing with at this time as an early draft of the experiment that I hope to work on more is to study the effect of microgravity as well as lunar gravity, as we did some lunar gravity experiments, is to assess how grains behave differently in these environments. Because if we want to explore and to permanently inhabit both Moon and Mars, we need to understand how the grains are going to behave, whether they're going to get into our instruments, will it get dusty? For example, the Apollo astronauts found that the moon was a lot dustier and all of their things got dirty, much more than they expected. So I actually took sand sample from my home province of Newfoundland, as you can see, in this clear box, and on the flight we got to see it in the weightless environment, which was quite special. I was delighted to see the interest that my local community had. The video was viewed over 100,000 times within a week. Everyone was really excited to see me and the box weightless, which was quite special. So it's easy to find the video online if you're interested. And we're looking forward to some follow-up studies with this as well, because this was quite a special experience too. As we were able to see what it was like. So this is just before we were about to go weightless, and if you take a look at the video, the sand behaves almost like a flock of birds or waves crashing around. It had a mind of its own. It was very interesting. So we're looking at studying this in subsequent flights as well. And we'll see how good this quality of video is. We can try. Hopefully it will play for you guys as it is for me. And you can see now, from those in the background, we're almost just about weightless. And you can see now that the grains are behaving on their own. I'm also flying there a flag from my home province in Newfoundland and Labrador. So it was quite interesting to see. And now you can see that we're back down experiencing gravity again. But it was quite special. It was an experience I recommend for everybody. So as I've been on this extra road of training to hopefully go to space within the next few years on a suborbital commercial flight, I really wanted this to be an experience that was more than just myself. So I conducted as much outreach as I could for schools and community programs within my home province. Although this was a lot of work to coordinate and it took a lot of time and a lot of effort, I would not take that back for anything. The teachers and the people I got to meet It was truly inspiring. There has not been anyone from Atlantic Canada to go to space yet, and if it does become me, I want it to be something that we can all be excited about, and hopefully it can inspire others from my province to shoot and dream bigger. Because even though we don't have the means of working directly in space yet, it's something I'm working on so that there are means for that to happen, so that we can study and work in space from where I come from. So I think part of that is having a group of people, including young children and the next generation, who want and aspire to that. So even if their interests aren't in space, I hope that they aspire to do what it is that's interesting to them. And some of the things I found from going to these many schools, I had the pleasure of speaking to over 10,000 students, but more importantly, their teachers as well. I wanted to learn what it was that can better facilitate for them, or what are effective outreach tools for space and astronomy. And some of the things that really came clear to me from my conversations with them are the need for direct connections and hands-on activities. We often are using iPads, computers, phones, or written notes, and it can be understated that the importance of spurring a child's interest, or someone from the public who's never had a connection before, to have that hands-on experience. Why I think the first experience of someone looking through a telescope, for example, is invaluable. It's these hands-on experiences that can really be memorable as well as educative. And with regards to resources, I mentioned that we are relying a lot on web-based tools, particularly today as we are isolated in various degrees. It's important that these resources are regulated, and to make sure that the resources that everyone's using for astronomy outreach are reliable ones. So for example, Astro EDU collects a wide variety of astronomy outreach activities under various topics, various difficulty levels, but they are all peer-reviewed activities. So it's things like this that we know we can disseminate the proper information, because that's one of the role of science and space communicators, is to be that connection between the science and technology and the greater audience or greater public. So it's important that we're communicating the correct information. And last but not least, as well as accessible and relatable examples. Role models are immensely effective in terms of inspiring and motivating. And I can say this for myself, I've had a variety of role models, from the people I speak to every day to the people I've never spoken to that I still look up to. I think role models and accessible examples of the types of jobs and the type of people you want to be are important in the field of astronomy, particularly in the places where it's something that's not often practiced, not something that's very developed, or places where it is, and we want to find means of getting to that place in our career. So I think that's something to keep important, is finding ways to bring these examples of accessible role models as well as educators in an accessible way to the greater audiences. So I think that was hopefully a good overview of the various types of projects that I've had the sincere pleasure of working with in the domains of outreach and communications, and how I got to work in it and find my passion for it, and where my career might be heading. So with that being said, I want to give as much time as we can for questions. I'll lead Mayes to direct us on how best to do that, whether it's through the chat. But I want to thank everyone for joining today. I think communication and outreach is a very important part of science and communication. So I want to thank you for taking the time. And if you want to get in touch by other means, or to ask a question to me offline via social media, I encourage you to do so. And I thank you a lot for all of you taking the time.
Thank you, Bethany, for the very nice and rich presentation. So we're gonna welcome any question from the participant right now.
So we can do it by audio or by chat, whatever people prefer.
So I have a question, Bethany.
Absolutely.
How from, because it's very inspiring, you know, how from studying forest and animal, you just immediately thought to study space?
Great question. I think if you ask any of my friends or family, they'll say it's just something that I've always had an interest in. And I didn't honestly have a specific part of space that I loved. I just knew that space really interested me. And while I was in school as a student from a young age, I used to always note down the topics that were really interesting to me that I was learning in school. And I found that just about all of them you can connect at the same time. Space connects just about sure in a particular discipline. Odds are that space are connected somehow. And I think that's what makes it really special. Um, in terms of other industries and domains that are out there. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to it so early.
So what is your next step? Do you want like to integrate the Canadian Space Agency, or what is like your future target to do?
Yeah, great question. So right now I'm still very much enjoying being involved through the European Space Agency. So Canada is an agency. So I've been enjoying working with them, and through Hubble, I'm also connected through the Space Telescope Science and NASA. It's an amazing community of outreach communicators within that field. So it's been great with them so far. And in terms of reach, I hope within the next decade to have my first suborbital flight commercially under my belt so that I can conduct meaningful outreach in that way and to disseminate what that whole experience was like from start to finish, because I don't think I'll be able to describe it until it's actually happened.
is that I want to ask a question.
Absolutely.
Is that I want to ask what is the best way and most efficient way to communicate knowledge about science and astronomy to a wide amount of people, like the best way.
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So it depends on what type of people you want to engage with. So in terms of something that's quick and effective, social media is one of those ways. The more lasting impact, I say that it's important to engage with schools because they will have the proper tools and outreach and resources. And if they don't, they have places that they can go to ask for these resources. Much of these larger organizations like the IAU or like the governmental agencies, they have means of supporting these schools and these education programs. If this is something that looks to be more developed. But in terms of something quick, social media is very effective. There's many of us that use these platforms in order to communicate. So for example, I use Instagram and the stories feature to share space facts each day about a new topic. And that's just something I've tried. I have other friends who do Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives to communicate to their audience. I think when it's something that's fun and different for you, so that you are not only enjoying it as you're communicating it, but it's effective for your own respective community, because I think we all have different needs and interests within our own circles, but they're all very inclusive.
Thank you very much, Bethany, for this answer.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there is a question I saw come up in chat that I want to address. Can blind people participate in astronomical activities? That is a fantastic question, and I will answer that with a very big yes. There are a variety of tools, particularly those that have been developed for the IAU, including some from IAU 100. For example, tactile models. There are a variety of very detailed models of the moon and other planetary bodies that those who are visually impaired can use to understand what these objects are like. There are also a variety of auditory tools that use sound. So for example, the IAU 100, one of the special projects that was supported was an initiative in which during the solar eclipse, I believe it was June of last year, there was a sound tool that changed its tone and its pace at which the sound was making its beeps, so that everyone could see or hear rather what time the eclipse was taking place. So it's creative things that are being developed like this that people can try, and there's a variety of resources. Again, Astro EDU is a great one we can look at for those who are visually impaired. So I think that's a really important question, and I'm happy to answer that one.
Yeah, we do have also a question from Hal. He say, I'm interested to hear if you have done any work toward improving people's science capital using space education.
Yeah, that's a great question. So because space in its nature is very multidisciplinary, I think that's one of the ways in which it can be used, but it has to be focused, of course. I mean, there's space medicine, there's astronomy, there's aerospace engineering. There, within the space umbrella, there are many different areas. I think what needs to be improved is communicating how space connects to all these areas, because people may be interested in pursuing medicine, but they may not have heard or understood the connection between spaceflight, human spaceflight, and medicine, for example. Or those who are really interested in microbiology, maybe they haven't considered astrobiology. So I think these are the connections that we need to improve, particularly for those who come from regions like myself, where there are direct connections to space. These are the connections we want to enforce so that they understand that this is a career path they can have. And that's something I like to emphasize. If there's a domain that interests you, to try to really specialize within that area, so then you can move on to space sector thereafter if that's of interest. So that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have other question from Yasin. He say how we can promote space education in schools.
Yeah, good question. So I think it can, firstly, it's very connected to the curriculum. So when I would do outreach, specifically within the schools, I would also connect directly with the teachers and ask them what part of the curriculum were they in. Were they talking specifically about Mars, geology, geography? So I could use that as a way to connect to their curriculum with the space content that I would be bringing when I would go to give their talks. Something that's important with space education is that we are using space as a tool for education. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of outreach and communications, and then specifically in the education domain, because I think space is an effective tool for education. And I think that's why the International Astronomical Union is so successful in that regard, is because they have specific offices for astronomy for outreach, another for astronomy for development, and another for astronomy for education, so that it's used as a tool for this reason. So I think it's something that we can consider how better to improve it, and again, to facilitate and harness the fact that it's a very multidisciplinary domain.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Tiliana. She say, what is okay learning for you personally from the IAU 100 that didn't usually go in reports, maybe related to working with communities and people around the world?
Great question. So I think when I got involved with IAU 100 about 2 years ago now, I definitely underestimated the scale of the size of things involved. I don't think any of us knew just how big and amazing it was going to become. Something that I'm very grateful on a personal level that I developed because of this project is both patience and flexibility. Particularly because we're working with a variety of people who have different access to resources. Some of these people were conducting their first astronomy event for their community ever. Others, I would be working with huge museums where this is their 100th. So I really wanted to be patient and take the time to support those with which they were maybe underserved communities, or this was an area in which it was new for them. But also patience and flexibility of myself. This required me to have meetings at 2 a.m. or to be answering emails for many hours, but it's something that I really would not take away, because I got to meet so many amazing people. Even if I never got to meet them in person, I now have a virtual connection with them, which I hope to meet all in person one day, but they all truly inspired me. The event organizers are the ones that motivate me still every day, because they're the ones that are going out on their own time, usually on their own money, to conduct astronomy outreach for the greater good. So I think that's immensely inspiring in its own right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question from Abdu. He say, what about flatland friends? Is there any evidence to convince them to sphere the Earth?
Great question. So I actually come from Newfoundland, Canada, which is considered to be one of the corners of the flat Earth, for those that do believe so. So I very much believe that everyone is entitled to their own opinions. but I'm someone who has studied science in a way that's evidence-based. And then with time, I hope, of course, to conduct my first suborbital flight within the first few years. So I hope to come back and communicate what it was like to see as much of the sphere of the Earth as possible. But of course, we should never dismiss anyone for their other opportunities. I think it's important to allow everyone to have their own, but to also be respectful of scientific data. So it's not of my job to fight with anyone, but it is important to be an effective communicator. So for example, once I've seen the curvature of the Earth, it's important that I effectively communicate that once I'm back.
Okay, another question from Graciel Amiel. He say, hello Bethany, do you accept volunteers in the Office for Astronomy Outreach of the IAU?
Great question. So the Office for Astronomy Outreach, as you know, is an amazing organization that has supported particularly the National Astronomy outreach coordinators around the world. These are the points of contact who are coordinating the outreach in their respective regions. So you'd have to communicate directly with them about the process for becoming a national node. But I know regardless, it's important that you connect with the node from your community first. So you can maybe find out how to already start working with them. There might already be a national node for your country that you can work and collaborate with, because they are the best contact points, not only for the IAU, but astronomy outreach in that region.
I don't know if you do have other question from participant. Yeah, we do have other question from Selma. She said, during coronavirus or any exceptional condition like this, which prevent them to meet each other face to face, what are the best way to communicate people with astronomy? What is your advices?
Great question. So, of course, we are in unprecedented times, and I think it's a set of circumstances that maybe no one had expected. And so everything that's taking place now is still new, and everyone is trying to accommodate as best they can. Something that's been happening a lot is webinars, and just events like this in which people who have common interests, common goals, common visions can come together to share these ideas. For example, for those who are familiar with the Space Generation Advisory Council, which seeks to support those who are young professionals as well as students, particularly those under the age of 35, through the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, through which I have the pleasure of also working for communications and outreach with them. They have a massive webinar calendar that has come to develop just over the past couple of weeks. In the next month alone, I think there are about 25, and they range from everything from space defense to astronomy to analog missions. So I encourage people to take a look online at the variety of virtual events, because this is a type of situation that we're in now that presents us with a special opportunity for these events to be organized and coordinated. And I think they're also presenting themselves to instill new connections and new projects that could continue in the future, even after this pandemic is over, and it's providing us a better means of communicating with people and sharing our ideas. Especially if we can't do it face to face. I think meetings like this online are a good way to keep that strong. And I know a lot of astronomy outreach communicators and projects are still working hard to keep things moving and going, such as the Office for Astronomy Outreach, like the Space Scoop project. We're all working hard so that things can continue and so that there are still new resources. For example, the Office of Astronomy Outreach has a giant list of astronomy resources that has been pooled together that I encourage you to look at, because then you'll have a vast collection of things that you can refer to.
Okay, we do have another question from Malik and Dohani. He say, is there a thoughtful project with long-term plan to bring together astronomy and volunteer in the field of astronomy by NASA, ESA, or UNESCO?
Good question. So I don't want to speak on behalf of for these organizations, but there are some that are repeating on a regular basis. For example, some of those global projects that I spoke about in my presentation will be continued on an annual basis by the Office of Astronomy Outreach. One that I was involved in with UNESCO just 2 days ago was the UNESCO International Day of Light. And that's one that takes place every year on the 16th of May. So there are regular milestones and events that'll continue to be celebrated. And usually when there's big global events like this, all of these organizations will come together to celebrate them in their own way. For example, I know Asteroid Day is coming up in June, and several of these organizations that you mentioned will be taking part and celebrating to various capacities. So I think this is the best way that astronomers and communicators of different kinds can come together, is under these special milestones and events. And often they are collaborating with each other too, but it depends on the types of programs. But it's these types of events when that collaboration really comes out.
And then Ahmedu, he say, what about countries without NOC?
Great question. That means we even have a better need for those countries to have one. So I encourage that you reach out to the Office of Astronomy Outreach directly. They're very responsive, and then so they can get in touch, or if you want to send an email to me or reach out to me, I can connect you to them. And we'd be happy to introduce you to see what's possible, and for them to explain what the process is for becoming a node.
Okay, I don't know if we do have other question from our participant. Jean-Pierre, he sent his greeting and he said he were with us here.
Well, I really hope that I can go see him soon. I do visit his hometown in Ghent a couple times a year. So while I'm in Brussels, I hope that I can come see him soon. His project that he's coordinated with all of these telescopes was an integral part of IAU 100. So we could not have done it without him and all of the students that take part. So a big thank you to him.
Okay, concerning this part, Bethany, what kind of support or help could the IAU and their office help to support astronomy in countries with or without NOC, or even, for example, small clubs or small association? What kind of support does the IAU can give for this group?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of resources available. For example, they, I believe, recently just launched another edition of this telescope competition where you can apply to receive one of these high quality telescopes that have been assigned by astronomers. And these are prioritized to developing regions and to developing countries because we want to facilitate them to develop their own astronomy outreach initiatives in these underserved areas for maximum impact. There are also small grants that are available, so I encourage you to look on the IAU news page for the most recent availabilities, because these are the means by which you get this kind of support that you're looking for, which is very integral and has a really strong impact for the various projects that they have. And this is just specifically for the IAU, but those are two that come to mind, is the small project grants through the Office of Astronomy for Development, as well as the telescope initiative through the Office of Astronomy Outreach, just as examples. Yeah.
We do have other question from Costa Tilob. She say, I do have question about the future project for visiting the moon again.
Great question. So the United States has announced that they'd like to go back. I believe their initial deadline or milestone would be 2024. It's uncertain if that is still the intended deadline or milestone, because of course things have changed now in the past couple of months. But the intention is that we will have a permanent human settlement on the moon. And this is primarily being achieved through what's called the Lunar Gateway Project. So this will be a space station in orbit of the moon. Already a variety of partners have agreed to participate. This includes Japan, Europe, and Canada, as well as NASA. So there are partners that are coming together just like they did for the International Space Station for this next space station, which is our next step to having a permanent base on the moon. So this is serving as a gateway, hence its name, for us, not only to the moon, but to further locations as well, such as Mars. And something that excites me about the moon from a scientific perspective is the opportunity for astronomy there as well. So the reason that space telescopes are so effective is that they're located beyond Earth's orbit where there's the obstruction from the atmosphere. But imagine if we go that much farther on the moon, we can develop telescopes there that could look far into the cosmos, which is also why we're excited for the upcoming James Webb Space Telescope, because that will have added potential that will complement Hubble's research as well. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities both for human spaceflight and astronomy as well.
Okay, if we don't have any additional question, let's thanks Bethany Donner again for the very
thank you. Thank you for all your coordination.
Thank you for your time and for the very nice presentation. It was really so amazing to spend a great time with you during that talk.
Thank you very much. And if there's any other questions, please reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, and I'll be happy to get in touch with you. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.